All right. So, based on your introductions, I'm pretty sure we don't have any design professionals in the sense of, or are you a landscape architect by chance, or you did
Not
landscape
an
design?
architect, just design.
No, that's fine. But that's actually good because I don't like talking to architects and urban planners because I are one, and they tend to try to make things sound harder than they really are. And so, by virtue of that approach, I decide to communicate about design and planning in just a normal way, like normal human beings talk about it. Okay? And so, instead of talking to you with high design and planning kind of language, I am going to compare kind of the really important principles of design that pertain to downtown by comparing it to getting your home and your yard ready to host a party. Okay. And so hopefully through that sort of dialogue, it'll make a bit more sense. So this is my home back in Columbia, South Carolina. Those are not grits on the ground. That's actually snow. It actually snowed there one Sunday.
Got one.
Yeah, it did. And so here's the deal. If my wife and I were going to host a party, I can guarantee you with absolute certainty, she would ask me to cut the grass, trim the hedges, and blow it off and sweep and blow off the porch. And once I get inside, because she's doing the hard work, of the food preparation stuff, I'd be vacuuming. But the point is, we would be getting our house ready to host people in our home. And unfortunately, so often when we think about our downtowns, we don't think about it in that same way. If you were going to have guests to your downtown, what are some of the things that you would do to prepare the downtown for them? So, but let's just pretend, for sake of argument, that I was a good husband. I was a dutiful husband. I checked out everything on my honey to-do list. The house is looking spectacular. The night of the party arrives, and I turn to my wife and I say, "Man, I'm really looking forward to this party." And I know we're supposed to be fashionably late, but it's a half hour. So how many people did you invite, when you sent out the invitations? And she looks at me and she goes, "What do you mean? I thought you were sending out the invitations." And so I'm going to actually foreshadow Ben's role because as pertains to downtown revitalization and planning, the invitation is the branding and the marketing that you do along with the promotional events and festivals that invite people to experience your home, your living room, your downtown. And so again, you're going to be excited when Ben talks. He's very charismatic speaker and he has great things to show you. But this is one of the critical things that we have to do. So often we fix up downtown, we fix up our buildings, and we forget to invite people. And so that's the first point I want to make before I even turn it over to my work on design. So your downtowns and our homes, there's always this place in the life of that experience where we make a first impression. Now, in real estate parlance, that's what they call curb appeal, right? It's when you pull up and what are the first impressions that someone has about your home. In our communities, that occurs at what we call gateways. Now, gateways are my definition of a gateway has little to nothing to do with your municipal boundaries. The motorist could care less. There's nothing that happens in our cars or our GPSs that says, "You've now arrived at Concordia." Okay? Where I care about you having a gateway treatment is where you feel like you've experienced arrival at a place. And every place where that occurs in Concordia, in your outer limits, you need to place some form of a welcome sign. Because as I like to say, you only get one chance to make a first impression. And so make sure you welcome people in a very thoughtful and attractive way. Yes, ma'am.
Can I interrupt here a minute?
Sure.
The chamber is trying to do this. We've been
Yeah,
trying
yeah, I
to
know.
do this. And
Right.
we're running down all these, brick walls.
Right.
So yesterday when we met, now we're trying to come up with all. So, is there something you all can help us with to move that along in any way?
Were you talking about the monumental sign that we saw? Yeah.
I don't know. Which one are you talking about? Yeah. The big brick stone one that we're doing, or trying to do? Okay.
Yeah, it's very attractive and kudos. I mean,
Who
that,
showed it to you?
Me.
Jamie.
Oh, you had it.
Yeah.
I sent it to him today.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's a terrific thing. Now, a lot of times what happens in those kind of situations is you make it out of material that's breakaway, or it's coming into the state of South Carolina from Georgia. There are these massive columns. They look brick. They are straight up styrofoam. Okay, they look like brick. You run into a car, they'd break away. If you have monument signs, you can have a breakaway device to make them, safe. Again, DOT is always going to say no. That's going to be their first reaction. It doesn't matter if it's a sign or a tree. For them, it's what's called an FHO, a fixed hazardous object. But there are ways around it, and don't take the first no for your answer. Just talk to them about, all right, well, how do we make this breakaway compliant, and go from there.
Well, and I was going to ask, is that the roadblocks you're running into?
Yeah,
Is it
MoDOT?
DOT? MoDOT?
It's MoDOT, and MoDOT said it's now federal, so now it's a federal thing.
Well, so here's, I'll give you a 2-minute rundown
Okay.
on how this works. So, the federal government issued a thing called the MUTCD, the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices.
Okay.
Absolutely stunning read. They put it out in 2009. They gave states until 2011 to adopt it or modify it and adopt their own. And now essentially it has become the Bible for how signs are handled. What ends up happening is the federal government threatens that if your signs are not up to the standards of MUTCD, then not only will they cut funding, but they have the ability to actually force to federal funding that's already been spent on roadways. Now, first of all, this only applies on federal roads and major state highways receiving federal funding.
Okay.
The other thing to remember too is, although I do not disagree with Randy's comment on the importance of the gateway sign, the gateway sign, it is the first arrival. It doesn't have to be at your city limits. It
Right.
doesn't have to be on the interstate announcing arrival off the highway. These are kind of the hardest thing to do in the world of signage. They're the most expensive, hands down, and they're going to carry the most restrictions. So what we're going to do tomorrow is not only are we going to show you some slight modifications to the current design that you're considering to make it more appropriate here, we're also going to show you additional signs that you might consider in a full comprehensive signage system. So if you find that you're hitting too much of a block with the hardest, start tacking away at some of the more reasonable, easier to pull off, so you can earn some wins.
Yeah, well, we talked about 2 other locations that we may talk to
Okay.
about it. One being across the street at the new Eagle Stop, and the other one being down at the 4-way at the bumper to bumper.
Gotcha.
So, I think everybody just in their mindset thought it needed to be at the intersection.
I would also say that everybody that thought that it was a good project probably had no clue, A, how expensive they end up being,
Right.
and B, how unbelievably difficult they are to actually get. So,
That's the
we can-
biggest road. The money we've had that
Gotcha.
money for a long time,
Gotcha.
and we want to get it taken care of.
Right.
And that's what we designated it for,
Okay.
and, so
Cool.
hopefully we can find a place that it can go.
Well, in the ultimate irony, that's actually one of my points, is to show you non-traditional gateways. Yes, we need to do the ubiquitous ones that are just, you arrive, there's a monument, there's a or a stand, and you got landscaping around it. But don't forget about non-traditional gateway icons. Water tower is one of the best, especially in a southern Midwestern environment that's relatively flat. You're going to see these things miles away. And so there is no law that says you can't paint them with custom colors and custom logos. And so you might as well take advantage of it. Don't let it just be a blank white or blue blob. Go ahead and take advantage of it. You probably don't have a railroad trusser, but I just showed that this is just kind of again, just unusual way to create gateways. Ben and I worked in Macon, Georgia, and you would never know at this nasty intersection, it's actually a very important intersection in the life of the city. So we've just come across where I'm standing. We've just come across a bridge off the Ocmulgee River, and the steps right here lead up to a plaza, and there's a bronze statue of Otis Redding there because that's where he sat and wrote, sitting at the dock of the bay. And then underneath this nasty rusted out train trestle on the left is the Harriet Tubman African American Museum and a beautiful train depot, the Georgia Music Hall of Fame, the Georgia Sports Hall of Fame, and 2 blocks up that street is the recording studio where the Allman Brothers got their big break. And so it's like, welcome to all these wonderful assets, and that's what it looks like. And so Ben crafted icons for those tourism destinations, repainted the trestle, landscaping, and you turn a nasty trestle into an actual gateway. Now, thoroughfares are the connecting streets between gateways in your downtown. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take your community, we're going to start broad, and we just keep getting narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower until we're in the heart and the core of the downtown. So the thoroughfares related to coming to the party at my house would be the sidewalk, the walk that connects from the sidewalk up to the house. And basically, when it comes to the life of the city, you just want to make sure those thoroughfares don't betray the experience that you'll have downtown. Now, you don't have enough money to streetscape them and treat them the same way you would in the downtown, but at least do no harm. The top and the bottom photo here are from Beaufort, South Carolina. It is a beautiful coastal South Carolina city. In my opinion, I prefer it over Charleston because it has the same charm, but minus about a gazillion tourists. And so this is what I was expecting to see when I drove to Beaufort the first time. And this is the main thoroughfare that leads you into downtown Beaufort. And the whole way I was driving, I was like, this doesn't look like the postcards by any stretch of the imagination. And so it's just important on your thoroughfares leading into the downtown that we do simple treatments that at least foreshadow what you can experience downtown. And so this is a photo rendering. This is a place called Conway, South Carolina. And, it's just Generica. High signs, buildings set back from the street. It's almost like a no tree ordinance out here. And so the admonition to them is just do simple treatments a little by little over a long period of time. So the first, we took some of Ben's banners and we put them on existing poles. Next, we said, why don't you get your beautification, committee and Gardens Club and plant trees ever so often along the corridor. Long term, see if you can capture medians and lower utilities so that you create this corridor instead of it being this wide, now it's just the width of the travel lane. That's going to slow traffic down better than anything. Long term, start to move those buildings up to the street. And again, you're looking at a 25, 30-year vision, but look at the difference between that and this. Again, it's still not on the scale of downtown with all the buildings up to the street, but you made some really important gestures, again, to not betray what you're going to experience downtown. Here's a much more humbler gesture from a town called Cleveland, Mississippi. And you can see the problem we had here was you could literally land a 727 on this street. It's so wide. And I don't know why they made it so wide. And so, again, for the motorists, it's this simple. A wide lane, I go fast. A narrow lane, I go slow. And so we needed to do some treatments that would kind of narrow that visual space. And so again, trees and banners on the poles, and then in this case, striped and stained bike lanes to visually narrow the width. Instead of it being this wide, now we can see you should only be driving in this part. It's a cool little university. They're the Delta State University. And so that's why the bike logos feature triangles. All right, so arrival is when we actually walk up on the front porch and we knock on the door. And so the same place in the life of your downtown is when you arrive at the downtown district. Now for you guys, it's pretty self-explanatory. You can see it and you can feel it. Coming in, I forget the direction, but basically the big church, really demarcates it on one end. Down on this end, it's that big building. I apologize, I don't know the cross streets, but it feels very obvious. And announce again their arrival, but this case, arrival to your historic downtown. And again, Ben's going to show you some signs in the system that would do that. They should be different than your overall community gateways, but they should yet again announce arrival to a special place. Here's two examples of And you'll see how they look very different from automotive arrival to downtown arrival. This is Lancaster, South Carolina. And I first want you to notice, and you need to pay attention in your own town, of how much of your signs direct you to other places as opposed to into your downtown. And this is their main street, and yet you can see all of the signage is trying to get you to turn in different directions instead of coming up into their downtown. Got a very historic courthouse, and you can start to see that almost all the buildings become brick. And so even though their gateway signs were metal, here we said you need to switch to a material and a scale that's more evocative of what you have downtown. Introducing crosswalks. Again, these visual crosswalks, that tactile experience of driving over them is going to slow down the motorist. And again, the visual of seeing a pedestrian against a contrasting color material just promotes pedestrian safety. More on that tomorrow, by the way, when I show you streetscapes in your own downtown. In Eureka Springs, Arkansas, they faced a different situation. And the problem here is you're coming in the main street, and you get to this place, and you think, well, which way do I go? Is it this way or this way? And there are some clues that would say to the left, but we said, let's really drive that point home. Crosswalks that clearly lead your eye there, introducing a gateway, wall feature, lots of landscaping, Lena, and then this is what's called the Trailblazer. And again, you'll see one from Ben for Concordia tomorrow, and then putting all your banners on one side and not putting them on the other. Again, just to lend all these visual clues as to where you should go, as well as announcing arrival. So when we get to the streetscape in a downtown is basically everything from a face of the building to the face of the building on the other side of the street. It's the sidewalks, it's the parking zone, occasionally it's the bike lanes, it's the travel lanes, and it's all the stuff that goes inside. It's the trees, it's the flowers, it's the bump outs, it's the benches, it's the trash receptacles. And all of those things need to work in concert with each other to create an atmosphere. And here's the most important point I want to make about this. An atmosphere where philosophically you can tell downtown is for people. Downtown is for walkers. We will allow a motorist through, but it's made for people. And so that's why we put those crosswalks in. We want the motorist to know you're welcome, but this place is for people. You need to slow down, you need to treat them. And so all of those things work together to create this atmosphere where people can see and be seen. We need to create creature comforts where we enjoy the canopy of shade trees, where we can rest, where we can walk. People like to see other people out on the sidewalk. And so that's why these streetscapes are really important. Here's another one that it's a fact or a percentage. In our downtowns, depending on the layout of the streets, they will take up between 25 and 35% of the land area in your downtown. And the simple point is, if you get the streetscape right, you will solve a quarter to a third of all of your downtown planning problems. All right? There's another factor I'll talk about a little bit today and tomorrow is also, if you do this, the architecture just doesn't matter. When's the last time you heard an architect tell you that? Okay? Because fixing up buildings is expensive, but this can buy you a lot of time. If you take care of the environment, I like to say experience and environment trump architecture every single time. Okay? Ben lives in a fabulous city called Greenville. Matter of fact, this slide up on the upper right is from Greenville. You can see just a lush, shaded environment, great outdoor dining, tons and tons of restaurants. The buildings are just good. They aren't great, but no one really, frankly, cares because they're having such a great time out in the public realm. My way of thinking about streetscapes are four C's. You get these right, you get the streetscape right. The first is the canopy, in other words, the trees and the landscaping. The second are the corners. Make sure you get the corners right. Each of your primary intersections, how you treat those corners are important. Part of that is also how you deal with the crosswalks, and the final thing is the creature comforts for us human beings. I just want to illustrate the power of a tree canopy and landscaping in two photographs that are only 8 years apart. This is a little town called Lake City, South Carolina. I have the privilege of serving as their project architect for downtown revitalization. And in the past, 7 or 8 years, we've restored, 20, 30, 40 buildings. We've done 2 streetscapes, 2 parks. But this was as recent as 2011 or 12, and this was a few months ago. And the thing I want you to really pay attention to, don't focus on the architecture, is just pay attention to the landscaping. between the trees and the landscaping, look at what a shocking difference that makes. Isn't that amazing?
Softens it and it's inviting.
Oh, it softens it, inviting, it introduces color. I wish you could, as a matter of fact, if you're ever in South Carolina, Lena, all of our downtown streetscape landscaping comes from our private botanical gardens. And they're off the charts good. And if you let me know, I'll get you a private tour. But to Lena's point, look at the difference. You know, just the introduction of flowers and color, it just takes the perception of quality just off the charts. And I recognize and I respect the fact that they're hard to maintain, but it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. And again, especially if you're in a situation where you're buying time to fix up the hard stuff, the buildings and the parks, if you take care of this, it's going to go ahead and give that first, quality message that this is a place that cares for its downtown.
And one of the big things I'll throw in on that is there's this death spiral that happens in a lot of communities where they try to beautify, they go through and they put plants out, there's nobody to maintain the plants die, and the community sees the investment as a poor investment. And it's kind of interesting, I'd jump in if you disagree, because this is a little touchy, but you have landscape architects, which most people think they're supposed to know about plants, but they're really space designers. And then you kind of move into that realm of landscape designers and horticulturalists. Now, oftentimes when we see streetscape projects are started by planning firms. They have traffic engineers, they have structural engineers, then they bring in landscape architects. Rarely do they actually have the people who know what you should plant. And it's also rare that they have somebody who understands we need to be really smart and strategic about our annuals we need to be smart and strategic about our perennials so that our annuals don't kill us on our maintenance.
Yeah.
And, it's being able to have not just the organic presence of plants, but really smart decisions that don't take an arm and a leg to keep it alive.
Thanks, Ben. Next are the corners, and I'm going to show you one of the worst streetscapes I've ever had to deal with. This is in Monroeville, Alabama. So if that name rings a bell, that's the home of Harper Lee of To Kill a Mockingbird fame. And so over here to the left is the actual courthouse where the movie was photographed. And Truman Capote's from here as well, so it's the literary capital of Alabama. The problem is the way that the streetscape around their courthouse square was designed, particularly the corners. It was scary to cross. And I had to stand up in the final presentation with a policeman at the back door and admit out loud that I jaywalked at the mid-block because it's the only place where I felt safe. And from the back of the room, he goes, no, absolutely, I totally agree with you. Because it was just such a chaotic thing. And you can see that there really isn't much that says this is a place for the pedestrian. Everything looks to be geared towards the motorist. So I'm going to show you a series of before or layers of a rendering, which I'm happy to say they've now actually done. So the first thing is just put up that little sign that says stop if somebody's in the crosswalk. And then again, I'm a huge fan of demarcating crosswalks with texture and color. And again, if you can't park here, then I would much rather see a landscaped island. Of course, the last thing we have to deal with is that. Is that not crazy? That's just silliness.
That's the first thing I noticed.
Of course you did. Sheer chaos. So thankfully, I'd been to Williamsburg, Virginia, and Jamestown, Virginia, and I noticed that what they did, it's such a simple treatment, really important. This complies with every aspect of DOT signage. Size, fonts, reflectivity. The only thing they did is instead of having all these separate ones, they put the different signs on a common panel. And so if you go back to this and look at what happens if you simply do that, it's actually pretty shocking what a difference it makes. It still ain't great, but it's a heck of a lot better. So back to corners. Keith gave me these from, is this Liberty, is that correct? Liberty, Missouri. Great suggestions here. And I want you to notice two things. The first is some of the corners are actually cut out in their planters, and others are just still hardscaped, and they just put planters on top of them. And so if you can't, do you understand what I'm saying? So like here, they didn't saw cut anything, they just introduced planters and sculptures. Here, a combination of the two, and here was an actual bed. I was in Louisville, Kentucky a couple of weeks ago. There was nothing in their streetscape. Everything you see right here is portable. Here's a little bit better picture. You can see it's basically a pop-up park, a pop-up sort of seating area, pop-up greenery at the corners. And so in the short term, before you kind of do a full-blown streetscape, take that approach. Get planters and introduce and sculpture and introduce treatments at those corners. Again, why are the corners important? Because they're the pause points on a regular rhythm throughout your downtown, and especially for the pedestrian, it's the place they're always going to be crossing. And so create a moment for them to experience something good. And then when they cross over, again, the crosswalks. And again, there's so many ways you can do this. Do y'all get a lot of snow and snow plows? Yes or no? Okay. So for you, you may want to do this approach, which is the Bowmanite or the stamped asphalt. In other words, it's not a true paver. I mean, yeah, it's going to get scraped up eventually, but you can just restamp it, restain it. But, I'm a huge fan of these really colorful, artistic, and creative ones. Again, you just need to take the temperature of your community. If you're in a college community, you can pull this off all day long. Or maybe by the park, you do something different, and at the other crosswalks, you do something yet again different. And the last are the creature comforts. Just again, people want to sit, they want to throw their trash away on a regular interval. I'm not opposed to this in green or black. It's kind of ordinary. I'm kind of partial to this myself, but I'll take either one. It's just make sure those kinds of gestures are there. Look at how rich this environment is, and all the things that are layered in this zone between the building and the roadway. Sandwich boards, what do you call these? Trash receptacles, outdoor tables, the flags and the banners, the hanging baskets. I mean, it's a really, really lush environment. That's Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a Great American Main Street Award winner a couple years ago. So the entry in our downtowns are the facades. In other words, that's where you actually enter into something in your downtowns. And so I kind of liken that to all the rooms inside of our house, because whether you go into a bedroom or a dining room or a den, they're different. And all of our buildings in downtown are different. Matter of fact, that's the most distinctive thing about your place. It's the fact that all of those buildings, the only place I can find them on the planet, are in Concordia, Missouri. The things out on the highway I can see in hundreds of places all across America, but I can't see your mom and dad's building anywhere else. I can't see that stunning church anywhere else. I can't see that bell tower anywhere else, And so that's why we need to care for these. And again,
And I want to jump in on
Yep.
that, because Randy says that, and it's like, it sounds kind of sweet, and it sounds like, if you look at it from the downtown, you look at the fact that it's unique. But like, I always kind of think of it from a branding standpoint. I think of it from a different angle.
it's good.
Corporate America wants your interchange to feel like everywhere else.
True.
Casey's wants their Casey's to feel like every other Casey's. So like, you literally have businesses in the community whose goal it is to strip uniqueness. So it's not just kind of a passive difference, there is an active difference. And if you don't actively preserve the uniqueness that you have, you will allow the homogeneity of the bigger business to kind of dilute your personality. So
That's a great point.
I like to say, I know it feels a little bit more doom and gloom, but I mean, there are active forces fighting against the preservation of your personality.
Yeah.
So it is always good to preserve what you've got.
Excellent point. So I'm going to show you, I think, 4, maybe 5 buildings that I've worked on in Lake City using a facade grant approach, just to encourage you all. And I intentionally chose, most of the buildings I'm going to show you are very humble, maybe 1 or 2 nice ones, because I think so often we have this image in our mind of how all the buildings need to look, and sometimes just simple tricks, paint, or in this case, removing, this ski lodge wood. And by the way, this was this humble little building has a soft place in my heart. This is the first one I did there. And I call it my ropes course building because the awning is literally being held up by ropes tied up to the roof. So if you think you've got some rough buildings in your downtown, welcome to the party, okay? And so obviously the solution here is just to pull that off. I mean, again, that building is not going to win any design awards, but at least it's not that. And at least now it speaks to an earlier period and an earlier language. Here's the power of paint. And again, you also have to take into consideration use, whatever's inside can dictate it. So here was a photographer. And so I worked with her and I was able to take her brand and her brand colors. But don't lose sight of, we're talking paint and awnings. You ready? Isn't that amazing? Paint and awnings. Paint and awnings. So don't make it so serious and so hard that you can't see dramatic facelifts. Again, I don't know what people were thinking back there because underneath a lot of wood and the paint is this. Why in the world would you ever that up? Obviously those are more expensive, but a whole new brand new storage front canopy system. Again, another example of it's all there. It's just what's that? Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And so this now is the Main Street working target. And then the last one is why? Just why? Why would you do this? Because again, everything there for these buildings. And so the power of your facade grid program cannot be underestimated. And that's why Ben and I get so animated about it. You got to celebrate it before, during, and after photographs. Just the power of that stuff. And at your annual meetings, you celebrate those things because you're going to forget what you pulled off. Yep.
And you guys going to show the sidewalks attempts to bring sidewalk signs to bring attention to them doing these projects?
I don't think I have that in this presentation, but what Keith's alluding to is I have a phrase, it sounds a little negative, but it's true. You can't underestimate the general public's inability to connect the dots. You're doing all this hard work and they can't figure out, oh, Main Street, oh, Chamber, oh, the city's doing this.
Yeah, we hear this all the time. Oh, is it the city that did that?
Exactly.
And we're like, what?
So all you need to do is create a simple sandwich board, and every time you do a public improvement project, whether it's a building, whether it's planters, whether it's sculpture, just put out a sandwich board. Another piece of our masterpiece falling into place. And people, oh, that's another one of, whether it's your initiative or yours or the one Concordia, which I think is a brilliant idea. Just draw attention and celebrate that implementation. So in the meantime, all right, everybody repeat this word after me, temporary. 1, 2, 3, temporary. There are some tricks of the trade that we can do temporarily to take the edge off of the appearance of empty buildings, okay? But the key is temporary. I don't want you to do this as a permanent solution. It's just to buy time until you can lure a new tenant into the place where you can do a facade. Obviously, you can put art in the windows. In Anniston, they just created a pop-up gallery, just invented one out of thin air. Peoria, Illinois, they took white butcher paper, printed these old historic photos on it, taped it up in the back of the street, in the back of the window. And so you're so focused on this really cool nostalgic photograph, you don't notice the building's empty. Here we couldn't do that because inside it was a medical facility. So the solution here was to put vinyl clings like you see on cars, with the perforations. And so it's just historic postcards from that place on the windows. And then finally in Conway, I don't know if you remember, Conway was one of the thoroughfare treatments. We just did 11 by 17 posters. In other words, you can print them off of your home color laser jet. And there were simple statements of people in the town about I am Conway, and they tell why they love to work here, why they're raising their kids here, why they, it builds community pride. And you start reading these posters of people that you know or you go to church with or your kids go to school with, and you've forgotten the fact that the building's actually empty, okay? So pay attention to, you see this building being reflected in the window? We're going to come back to it in just a second. Actually, we're going to come back to it right now. So last night I floated an idea. passed you all called the facade component grants. And Lena, you weren't with us, so I'm going to catch you up to speed real quick. The simplest way to think about the facade component grant is Mr. Potato Head. The potato is the building, and the components, in this case, were the hat and the glasses and all the things we stuck on him. In the building, it's the same way. You typically have this brick shell, that's the potato, and the components that we stick on a building are the doors and the windows and the paint and the awnings and the lights and the signs. And you put all those things together in a unique assemblage, and you create a historic building, all right? And so, Lena, the power of this approach is rather than giving a lot of money to just one or two buildings to do everything on their building, you just fund one or two components per year. So, for example, in Beaufort, remember Beaufort, the nasty thoroughfare? One year, all they did was awnings. And I think they had almost 40 buildings receive new awnings. And as a result, they got a significant discount from the awning fabricator. In Hartsville, they're doing signs. And so because these buildings and building owners are getting, a couple $100 for signs, they're tending to do far more ambitious signs than they would have done ordinarily. And so this is the building that you just saw reflected in the window, and this is what it used to look like. And when we pulled that slipcover off, that's what we found. And the city got so excited, they offered one time $1,000 slipcover removal grants. And so this group of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buildings, all owned by the same owner, took advantage of it. And you could see, I don't know if you can compare the top and the bottom, all of those slipcovers came off. And by the way, that's their main street. And what a dramatic visual appeal that it makes. Now, in the life of the party, there's always extroverts and introverts. I am a painful introvert. So this is where I'm going to search for. Okay? I'm going to look for the garden out back where I can hide with only one or two of my friends, while my wife, the extrovert, is just entertaining the masses inside. So our parks and our open spaces in our downtowns are really important for the same reason. We need to create spaces for everybody. Whether you're 8 years old, 18 years old, or 80 years old, don't make all the chairs, don't make all the benches, don't make them all the same. Put some in the sun, put some in the shade. I'm a big fan of movable furniture, because sometimes there's 2 of us, sometimes there's 5 of us, sometimes there's 6 of us. And so being able to move that stuff is really, really important. And of course, food, comfort, lights for security, all those things play into it. And again, part of the role of the Main Street and the Chamber is then to just introduce programming in those parks and open spaces. As I like to say, program the snot out of them. And by that I mean not just the big events. Get the local high school, the band program to give you a 4-piece quartet to go play. Everything doesn't have to be big. You just need to introduce life and vitality on a regular basis. If you've got yoga classes, why couldn't it happen in the downtown park? Here is one of the 2 parks that I had the privilege of working with in Lake City. It was our theater that burned. So they kind of sort of saved the facade, and this is what it used to look like. It wasn't bad. It was just kind of hard and sterile, and everything was kind of anchored down. And so now what we did is we allowed the furniture to move. We couldn't plant trees, so we just introduced shade sails. We introduced water for sound as well as for the visual appeal. And Lena, I wish you could meet Katie, who just handled all the horticulture here. And I wish I can show you a picture on my phone later. So she planted some grasses back here, and they've now grown up to create a complete solid screen between them and the parking lot. And she's basically created a room by virtue of her plant material choices. Just outstanding work that she did. And so again, before and after. And then this is my favorite way to see it, is when it's just chock full of people, just full of activity.
Okay, quick question on that. When you've got movable furniture like
Yep.
that though, do they have problems with it disappearing?
Not a single time.
Really?
Not a single time.
And I'll give you an example too, in Excelsior Springs, we did a little park in memory of our mayor, and we bought some colorful Adirondack chairs, and we were so nervous about putting them out there.
Right.
And so they sat in my garage for a period of time. And we finally decided, you know what, we're just gonna put them out there, and whatever happens, happens. They are still there. You can use them all the time.
Okay.
Mary, my response is twofold. One is serious and one is humorous. So the serious answer is, I think so often when we treat our community with respect, they tend to respond in kind. And so if we give them good things and we give them the best, then they tend to behave up to the level of what you give them. But the humorous response is just mount some fake cameras in there. Okay, I mean if you're sincerely worried about it,
Lighting.
yeah, and lighting, and the other option, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute when I talk about vibrancy amenities, is you could have people, merchants put stuff out and take stuff back in. But we haven't lost a single thing, not a single thing.
And I'll pipe into that too. When I was at Northwest Missouri State, attending there for my undergraduate, the university talked about they had a strategy to put trash cans every so many feet. And they've learned through the years that if there are trash cans available, the students will use them.
Yep.
If the trash cans aren't available, they will throw it on the ground because they don't have any other option.
Right.
So again, putting things out there that people will use and respect, they'll use them.
All right, pop quiz that I know everybody in this room knows the answer to. So you're throwing a party, and you got food and hors d'oeuvres and drinks spread throughout the house in different rooms, and you got places where people can sit and eat. But where does everybody end up in the party?
Kitchen.
Absolutely, every single time. So the question is, where in the life of our downtowns is the closest equivalent to the kitchen? Okay, let me rephrase it. Where in the public realm of downtown is the closest thing to the kitchen when we throw a party? You do.
Central Park?
No. Well, you could. You're thinking too hard.
Palace.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm thinking of
Okay.
the restaurant.
All right, so
Nazis.
here's the follow-up question. What if I told you there's a place in the life of your downtowns where you could spend less money, relatively speaking, but achieve a lot greater visual impact than expensive facade grants and expensive streetscapes? Would you be interested? Ding, 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 ding. That's the right answer. Whenever I'm working in master planning mode in downtowns, it's like if you get the sidewalks right, I like to say it covers a whole lot of architectural sin. Okay, because experience and environment trump architecture every single time. And so, yesterday when Ben and I and Keith and Jamie were walking around, we just were enamored with that part of your city up on the steps in the middle block between Central Park and the Ford dealership. The sidewalks are wide. This big perch. You got these great, fabulous buildings behind you. And I'm thinking, I would eat dinner out here every night of the week. I mean, it's just begging for outdoor dining and activity. And so in the meantime, this is a term we call vibrancy amenities. They're small, inexpensive insertions of color and interactivity into the public realm to promote what we call downtown stickiness. In other words, when families with kids come downtown, they stick around because there's something for them to do. By way of example, what you're looking at right here is called a parklet. A parklet is simply a temporary pop-up park that takes up 1 or 2 parking spaces. And look what you can do. You can sit at a table and read. You can play checkers. And do you see how the checkers are made? They're a series of tiles, and they put alternating color frisbees on top. And then they put up a couple planters worth of shrubs and trees. My landscape friends thank me if I say the word bushes. But look at these other ones. Imagine Central Park populated with cornhole and bocce and giant Jenga and Scrabble and again, all of these things that kids would love to play if you had them out there. And then
Careful though, might hit a monument. Or a
stop.
Lions Club shelter.
Be nice, Ben.
But what about doing that on the Trail of Memories? Isn't that cute?
Anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Do you know the Trail of Memories?
That's
Oh,
where that's
dude.
where
Trail
Parks
of
and
Tears.
Rec went to
Trail of
die.
I
Memories.
can show you the Trail of Memories.
It's
You're
a 5-block reclamation of an old rail bed.
Oh, awesome.
From Central Park out to the complex.
Brilliant. I love it.
And Parks and Rec wants to do something with it and develop it, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
Like a linear board game.
I think another thing you should do, and maybe I'll show some of this tomorrow, is use art and interpretive plaques as breadcrumbs. There's a fabulous park in downtown Indianapolis called White River State Park. Imagine a park that was on one side of the city and across the river was another side, and they closed a 4-lane road. Are you familiar with it? Okay. And so what they did is in the middle, they made it completely green, wide spaces on each side so you can walk or bike or hike or inline skate. And on this big swath of green, they put a sculpture here. And 50, 75 yards away, they put another one there. And 50, 75 yards, they put another one. And so you're drawn to these sculptures, and by the time you know it, you've crossed a 1/4 mile river because you were just lured down. And so imagine that path, exercise equipment, a piece of sculpture, a piece of art, an interpretive plaque, something, these lures. So the lady, the second one, this is Eileen. She's a neighbor of mine. She's an artist. She took these propane tanks, welded them together, different sizes. You sit in this little bench, you play them, creates a tune. It is so hard. This is on Main Street in Columbia. It's hard to find that seat because they're such in high demand. Pop-up things, just interactivity. Before I die, what do you want to do? This building wants to be just anything that you can do to introduce life and activity. Here's a trick that we did in Lake City. We had the local high school art department work with the Votech school to create these 9 portable miniature golf courses. And so they're all custom designed by the different artists. You can see how they're all different. And then what we do is right now you need to be thinking the pocket park, okay, right in the heart. And so we populate it with that at certain parts of the year. And other times we distribute it through the downtown, so you play through downtown. But imagine, how do y'all refer to that space where the mural is?
The empty lot?
Okay.
The place where the scrambler goes in street fair?
We need to rebrand that. But to me, that ought to be a pocket park. And imagine that space populated with any or all of this kind of stuff.
It's not even a pocket, it's like a full lot.
Yeah, I mean,
It can be a mini park.
the fourth of the block there, yeah.
All right, now I'm going to make
A building that burned down, like maybe in
When
the
it all
30s or
was?
the 40s.
Mini park?
I'm not sure what.
Yeah, it was
It's
all
probably in this
park.
book.
I'm pretty sure it was all those mini
Okay.
I want to make a really subtle shift and present this as options. Okay. What I showed you before, the assumption is an entity, whether it's Main Street or the Chamber of the City, would buy those things and put them out there. There is another alternative for things that are building and place specific, but where they touch the public realm. And it's the same notion of vibrancy amenities, but you can introduce and offer vibrancy grants. So you've got this $10,000. I'm a big fan of using it for the buildings, but you could use it in this way. So if you got a restaurant, right now you need to be thinking about the Palace. And if you went to the Palace and you said, hey, would you guys be willing to put bistro tables and chairs and colorful umbrellas outside? If you are, we'll match up to X for that. We'll do the same for the benches outside. Instead of just having the same old boring ones, let's do colorful ones. We'll allow you to buy pieces of art and sculpture. We'll even, in Norfolk, Virginia, their Main Street program, they actually fund garage roll-up doors.
There's one of that in Lee Summit too, that's very.
Yeah, and
cozy and neat.
it just brings life to downtown. And so, again, if you can do it just paying for it, great. But another strategy is to incentivize the private sector to do that right in front of their buildings. So this is my last slide. Well, next to last slide. So maybe we need to be rethinking our facade grant approaches. We've already lobbed that ball to you. We'll talk about it a bit more tomorrow. I'll show you some actual examples. And maybe should we also introduce and consider vibrancy amenities or grants. Now, as pertains to your action plan for the design committee, the handout that I gave you, as you may have scanned it, it tracks with what I presented. But this ultimately is a dark trip inside my head. Because these are the questions that I ask and answer when I come into your community, okay? When we drive in and we do the tour, Jamie didn't know it, but in my head, I'm asking all of these questions. And so for your design committee, what I would offer to you as a consideration for them creating their annual work plan is to take this handout on all the questions, drive and walk around your downtown, ask and answer them, and probably what you should focus on will become self-evident, and kind of craft your action plan around your answers to these questions. Okay? That make sense? I'm going to stop the recording, and then if you have any questions or comments for me, we can talk about them. So